That was very. So we can go to the panel now. Do we want to start with BP Giselle or
If you don't mind, because you're well
being
questioning
challenged?
the limitations of the scientific method, and you probably know the traditional scientific method, hypothesis, and then experiment, etc. And the way we do science these days is different, and I affirm that it is one of the highest functions of human existence or activities of human existence. And it provides you the balance for rational thinking, empirical behavior that would be refined and extended like a telescope and a microscope by technology, instruments that aid your brain and your senses for sensing what's out there. Then you'd have a phase of experimental intervention, and you'd say that science is practiced in an iterative way with a balance of rational hypothesis, empirical observation, and experimental intervention. But then it doesn't end there. So you're supposed to integrate what you get from all of these human activities and come up with a report or a communication that you should share with the rest of your colleagues. So this is what you call public dissemination. And that way, then peer review or peer comments will be elicited, and your science can be questioned and may withstand the test of time, or it would have to be corrected. So we say that science is self-correcting. So it does not profess to tell you truths. There's no real scientific truths. There are only partial truths. So this is a very philosophical way of looking at the way we try to understand natural phenomenon. And let's just say that passion and creativity are not lacking in the practice of science, because that's the same driving spirit that well, gets scientists to understand not only themselves but the rest of nature.
Thank you, Dr. Concepcion. Dr. Poblador?
May I? I would like to give my 2 cents worth. In the concept paper that I prepared for this forum, I describe complexity theory as an overarching framework, conceptual framework, through which scientists in the different disciplines can engage in a continuing dialogue. Now, I am not. It is in the nature of a supra theory or a meta theory. Actually, it's not a theory in the usual sense where you have empirically falsifiable conclusions. It is not predictive to begin with. But I am encouraging the continued specialization that pervades academe today, right? But I think we should all be, one way or the other, dabblers. My field, by the way, if I might be humble enough to admit, is management. You cannot be more mundane than that. But I dabble in all sorts of things that I did not study in college or even in graduate school. This gives me, at this stage of my intellectual life, a much wider perspective. I can see how different sciences can look at certain phenomena, because I am familiar with the language, so to speak. I learned the language of complexity all by myself since about, maybe a decade ago. I've been interested in it because work on complexity theory has been started in the early 80s, right? Right, in the Santa Fe Institute. And I've been following through the works of certain scholars from that institute. So, ang ano ko kasi dito is if we have the opportunity to bring our complementary perspectives of the real world together, we will be able to capture significantly more value than what we could otherwise do if we just added our individual knowledge together. So there is this, it is an external effect, if you might want to call it that. As a matter of fact, there's a law that describes it. It's called Metcalfe's law, which tells us that by networking among ourselves, the different individuals with different perspectives can come up with much more value for the aggregate, for society as a whole.
Thank you.
I think that at least coming from the humanities, long ago we realized that language is not just a medium, it actually is a constitutive mediating force. That without it, it's what enables you to understand something, and it constitutes what you're understanding. It is not transparent at all to the reality you're looking at. So I think that if we are just a little more sensitive to the idea that even if we're using the language of science, that language is what constructs the thing we are looking at, then we can be a little more open, I suppose, to the possibility of other languages looking at the same thing and coming up with something entirely different. At least from my presentation, I thought I wanted to stress the fact that we're perfectly happy in the humanities with the idea of paradox, which always flummoxes scientists. Because you begin with at least, what? Particles, they're not the same thing as waves. And then, of course, they can be quantum. Quantum has made it, the paradox become sort of pretty mundane for the scientists. But we've been doing it a longer time. That's what I'm saying. We were so happy with paradox, which seems like illogical thinking, really. That's why artists have been stereotyped as But we've been there along. That's been our territory for quite a while. But I think rather than a center for complexity studies, we should have a center for paradox studies. And probably that will embrace more disciplines and more scholars and more practitioners. More contradictions. Yeah.
Scientists love chaos as well. You can call it the Center for Chaos Studies.
I was, while listening to the questions and the discussion, I remember reading an ethnography too. This one, I was reflecting on the question Dr. La Peña raised about how being able to integrate all of these. One of the more fascinating ethnographies I encountered was one by Emily Martin, and one of the core concepts she was exploring was flexibility, not just in the age of AIDS. This was then back in the 90s with the changes going on in American society at the time. And this was a fascinating ethnography because it was jumping all over the place, from the understanding of the working of the immune system, the understanding the working of the AIDS virus, the core ideas between a metaphor of the immune system as a fortress towards something that was more flexible and accommodating, and how the concept of flexibility was actually stretching out not just here but in other discourses all over society. And the interesting thing here was, if you could do this sort of study and inquiry, considering too that one of our own traditions has always been to make a critical inquiry and to make a difference in the larger society, then what sorts of new tools for influencing policy, for perhaps making a wider critical analysis of society and offering solutions could we come up with when you get something like this underway? I'm leaving that open-ended as just an exploration of a possibility. I cannot answer my own question at the moment because it's going to be something totally new and something totally different.
Let me just add my 2 cents worth. The breakdown of disciplinary silos, as Mike was saying earlier, has really been going on. For example, the Nobel Prize in Economic Science has been given to a political scientist, Ostrom, and then to psychologists, to computer scientists, a statistician, and so there's almost no more, it's more the break, no clear boundaries now, even at that level of the Nobel Prize Committee.
Thank you. Huling hirit.
sort of having that community of wide, I would say wide readers or generalists, really, and the dabblers. We are probably actually lagging behind the young people who are so immersed in hypermedia and in the internet, and all these things are actually interpenetrating now, you know. So I think we need to learn more from the young who are actually living in a more simultaneous reality than we are. We were trained under the older kind of system where you have to be specialists. We have to be sort of like, you know, confined to one or two things. But the young are actually dabbling in many things. So they probably are more at home in complexity than we are.
They really are.
Yes, they are more at home. And now and then I do want some linearity, because that's another way of looking at it, the linear as opposed to the complex. Particularly, I've noticed that there is this thing called polyamorous love, no? So many young people can have more than one relationship at the same time, and that's very complex. And you know, of course, because I teach gender literature, gendered stuff. We discuss that, and I learn from them because I don't understand polyamorous affection at all. But they live it, you know, and they don't get tired, because when they describe it to me, I'm exhausted, just listening.
I know one relationship is complex enough.
I know.
Yes, sir. We will go, this will be the third and last round, meaning 2 or 3 more questions or comments, and we go through the panel, and we should close. I think some people are hungry, but we did say this will go to 12:30. No? Go ahead, sir.
Can I just like to ask a practical question. I think we are all agreed that institutional change is very important, especially now, what our country is going through. And I was just wondering how this initiative here how do you plan to progress and
From here.
move forward? And
I
I think this is something that we should continue. But I would like to hear.
Let me share my thoughts about this with you. 6 months ago, when I don't even remember whom I first called. Hey, I think it was Pepe Miranda or Dodong Nimenso. I wrote this concept paper. I didn't even know what I was talking about, and I just sort of floated this around. I got Dodong for coffee, was it, Dodong, or something stronger? And of course, Fidel Nimenso and other people who are part of my personal network. And before I knew it, I was involved in a very, very informal, freewheeling discussion with the likes of Vic Paz and others. And I got many others to join me eventually. And of course, Giselle was there all the time, very, very supportive. As a matter of fact, I think she has been funding my travel and accommodation from Baguio just to be in the company of these people. But over beers, you'll be amazed at how much new insights can emerge, using that term again. Now, if only we can make this sort of informal, getting together over coffee, over whatever, or just bumping into each other on the corridor, engage ourselves in a continuing conversation, even without the benefit of a formal present forum like this. Then maybe a culture, an underground culture within the university can emerge, right? Maybe with a minimum of intervention from Quezon Hall. I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't want to denigrate the role of Quezon Hall here, but I think if we have to change this university, we have to converse with one another, because change can only emanate from the components of the system.